Replacement devalued. Does the narcissist think about you? You were ensnared by the narcissist. You became the intimate partner primary source. You were embedded in the golden period. You were then devalued. And disengagement came. The narcissist got rid of you. And the reason for your disengagement was that somebody else was chosen to replace you. That intimate partner secondary source of a shelf variety became a candidate, and she came in and you went out. And thus you were disengaged from, and the narcissist embarked on a new golden period with your replacement. But now there is trouble in paradise. The new intimate partner primary source that replaced you is being devalued. Is the narcissist now thinking about you? Now, first of all, you ought really not to care about whether the narcissist is thinking about you. It's understandable when you've been disengaged from to wonder this, and the relevant video explains that. It's also understandable that you might be wondering that when you've been replaced initially as part of the disengagement, whether the narcissist is thinking about you. And similarly, you may also be wondering when you've escaped the narcissist, is the narcissist thinking about you, more to do with reasons of wanting the narcissist to leave you alone, that the narcissist won't come after you. But to be wondering, is the narcissist thinking about me after you've been replaced, and this could be some months, maybe even a year or two, before the devaluation occurs, suggests a breach of your no-contact regime. Why are you still wondering if the narcissist is thinking about you? You ought to have banished that thought from your mind as part of your no-contact regime. And I'd recommend that you consult with me and I can help you with that matter. Of course, notwithstanding that caveat, there are those that still pose the question, when my replacement is being devalued, will the narcissist now think about me? The answer to that question is that there is an increased risk that the narcissist will think about you. As I have explained elsewhere, when you're disengaged from, largely you are dismissed, forgotten about, and the narcissist rarely thinks about you. And if the narcissist happens to do so, it is dealt with in the manner that I have explained in the course of the relevant video, Disengagement. Does the narcissist think about you? However, when your replacement faces devaluation, they become painted black, and where it's the intimate partner, secondary source, they enter the sustained devaluation. And when that happens, this increases the risk that the narcissist will think about you. Now, you ought not to have been contacting the narcissist at all at this stage, because sufficient time should have passed that you'd have moved on. But, for the sake of completeness, if you, for whatever reason, and i.e. you breach no contact, you contact the narcissist when the narcissist is devaluing the intimate partner primary source, you of course come onto our radar. And in such circumstances, naturally the narcissist will think about you, because you've caused us to think about you by texting us, ringing us, calling to see us, walking past where we live. And in those instances, that amounts to a Hoover trigger, and it's highly likely that you will be hoovered in a benign way at that juncture. Of course, you won't necessarily know that your replacement is in devaluation. You certainly shouldn't have been monitoring the relationship to see that something had gone wrong, so that you can then time your contact with us so that it coincides with the devaluation to create a favourable response from the narcissist. That is the act of lunacy. You are operating under emotional thinking. You ought not to do it. But if you were to do that, either because you foolishly have been monitoring the relationship, or you just happen to have got the timing right through sheer coincidence, Your text to us, your call to us, you coming around to see us will mean that you come up on the radar and you will enter the narcissist's thoughts. This is a Hoover trigger, and the narcissist will now be viewing you white as opposed to black, because the current IPPS has become painted black, and that in all likelihood makes you white. The reset button has been passed. Sufficient time has passed for your treachery to dissolve, and now they are the traitor. And therefore, given the black and white thinking that we engage in on our compartmentalization, you all of a sudden are viewed white. And therefore, in the circumstances where you cause us to think about you, by you getting in touch with us, then we are likely to hoover you, and in a benign fashion. That hoover may just be to get fuel and control. It might be to look at resurrecting the formal relationship so that you end up replacing your replacement. But what if you don't do that? What if you have been eminently sensible and you have maintained within no contact to ensure that you don't contact us? Well, when devaluation of the current IPPS occurs, i.e. your replacement, they become black, meaning that in all likelihood you will become white. As I've just explained, the narcissism will rewrite history once again, and that all of your treacheries, your transgressions, and your traitorous behaviours, the slate will be wiped clean, until such course of time we need to resurrect them again in the future, but that's another matter. And at this juncture, your slate has been wiped clean. When that individual is in devaluation, it increases the risk that we will just happen to think about you, that we're reminded of you. For instance, this is what happens. The current intimate partner primary source, now viewed through the lens of black, does something which threatens our control. Accordingly, our narcissism in effect whispers to us, your ex never used to do this, and thus you come back on the radar. So, for example, you're trying to say something and your intimate partner primary source interrupts you, not in a nasty way, but just happens to interrupt you. That, of course, is challenge fuel to the narcissist. And therefore, where that occurs, where the IPPS is interrupted us, we're challenged by this. And the narcissism in effect says, how dare this individual interrupt us? We need to do something to assert control over them. And it might be to continue to talk or put them down. But also, in certain instances, the narcissism says, well, your ex would never have done this. And as part of asserting control over the devalued intimate partner primary source, the narcissist will say, stop interrupting me. Jemima, always listen to me. Note the use of always. You never allow me to speak. Note the absolutes again of never, the black and white thinking. Now, of course, the narcissist probably repeatedly complained that Jemima interrupted as part of when Jemima was painted black, but that's now altered. Jemima's black behaviours are forgotten about, erased, removed from the record, and you, as the incumbent intimate partner primary source, are devalued, and you're triangulated with Jemima, so that we then think about the former intimate partner primary source. That serves two purposes: the triangulation with the current one as part of the devaluation, and then, because our narcissism has caused the former IPPS to come up on the radar, the narcissism then asks this question: do we have control over Jemima? Remember, this is going on in the unconscious, where lesser or mid-range, and is consciously done where greater or ultra. And in this situation, the narcissism has created this triangulation. The current IPPS is painted black, and therefore we say to them, stop interrupting me, Jemima would never speak to me this way. That is done to assert control over the current IPPS. Because Jemima, the former IPPS, has now come into our mind, our narcissism also asks this question: is Jemima under control? We have no information about Jemima. We've not heard from her in a long time. Therefore, we do not know whether she is under control. Well, we need to assert control over her, says the narcissism if it had a voice. Are the conditions ripe for directly asserting control over her? And the narcissism undertakes an assessment of the Hoover execution criteria, and because of the shift in status from black to white, Jemima is more likely to find that there is a green light with regard to her being hoovered. And therefore, the risk factor for you, if you are the former IPPS, is this. When our current IPPS enters devaluation, one thing that our narcissism will repeatedly do is triangulate the current IPPS with the former one, current black, former white. And in so doing, we assert control over the devalued one, but it also brings you back on the radar. You haven't contacted us. You haven't texted us. You've not been round to see us. But you are brought into our thoughts, not because somebody's mentioned your name, not because we've seen anything that reminds us of you, but rather our narcissism has used you, brought you back to life, if you will, for the purpose of triangulation. And when that's done, that asserts control over the current IPPS, but it brings you back into play. And because you come onto the radar, that's a Hoover trigger, and the narcissism naturally asks, unconsciously, where lesser or mid-range, or consciously where greater or ultra, is this person under control? And invariably the answer is going to be, we don't know, and therefore that must mean no. And because the first law of narcissism is that all appliances must be brought under control and kept under control, that means that the narcissism has to assert control over you as the former IPPS. Thus, we think about you, and it's likely to bring about a Hoover if the Hoover execution criteria are met. Accordingly, when your replacement is being devalued, there is a much more increased risk that we will think about you. We're not just sitting around going, oh, I still wish I was with Jemima, and wasn't the world wonderful when I was with Jemima, but rather it's a formation of the assertion of control over the current IPPS. Of course, the narcissist may well be caused to think by the narcissism, I wish I was still with Jemima. Oh, Jemima was wonderful compared to this person. But you're resurrected, you're brought back to life, and then you may well be hoovered. What about if you're an intimate partner secondary source? Well, it's less likely that you'll actually have been replaced. Moreover, you're going to be put on the shelf while we bother with a different IPSS. And because it's very rare that we disengage from the IPSS, you're not really replaced. But rather, we might have two IPSSs on the go. You're on the shelf and we're interacting with the other one. There might be three, there might be four. It all depends upon the relevant narcissist. And so what will occur is that when we devalue the IPSS that we are engaging with, because it's a corrective devaluation rather than a sustained one. Remember, the corrective devaluation is basically the equivalent of a slap over the wrist for the offending secondary source to bring them into line again. And once they are, the devaluation stops, which is contrasted with the sustained devaluation that the primary source receives, because they are the one that we are with most of the time, and therefore they are being punished to a much greater degree. Where it's corrective devaluation, it tends to be short in time, which means that we don't necessarily think about the former, or rather another intimate partner secondary source at that juncture. It doesn't operate the same way as the intimate partner primary source in terms of the likelihood. What can happen is we might triangulate the IPSS which is off the shelf with you that's on the shelf. So you've not been replaced, but you're not being accessed, if you will. And then when that happens, in a way similar to that which I've described with the IPPS, because we use your name to triangulate with the IPSS that we're dealing with, you come into play. Our narcissism asks, is that person under control? We don't know. Let's take them off the shelf and get them under control. So it can lead to a Hoover. Sometimes, however, all that happens is you don't necessarily pop into our head, even when we're giving a corrective devaluation to the IPSS that we're dealing with. And therefore, although there is an increased risk that we will think about you, it is not a particularly substantial one. Also, it might be that if we've got, say, more than two IPSSs, if we are giving a corrective devaluation to IPSS number 1, you're on the shelf, and as number 2 and number 3 is on the shelf, we go from number 1 to number 3 and miss you out. We don't even think about you. And those considerations are also applicable to non-intimate secondary sources who are treated in a shelf manner also. The issue of thinking about you when your replacement is being devalued is the most relevant when it comes to the current intimate partner primary source. And the general position is this, that when the current intimate partner primary source is being devalued, there is a much more increased risk that we will think about you purely because that is being done as part of a triangulation against the current IPPS, and you have been painted white, meaning that you are viewed more favourably, and therefore you are more likely to be hoovered. But it is not the case that we are sitting around moping and lamenting over you. A mid-range narcissist will probably create that impression to you when you are hoovered, but we don't. We operate in the moment. And you will enter our mind, and if we act on it, you'll be hoovered. If we don't, then you disappear from our mind until the next time you are brought into it. But when you are the former IPPS, either the immediate one or further back, it's the immediate one who's most likely to be contacted and most likely to pop into our heads. This occurs with an increased risk when the current IPPS enters devaluation. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.